Ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, and everyone who has gathered here today, thank you. Thank you for giving me a moment of your lives, for giving me your ears, and I hope for giving me your hearts. I am going to speak to you with no filter, no fancy wrapping, no polite evasions. I'm going to tell you the truth, the way I've learned it from a lifetime of watching people try, fail, rise again, and sometimes fall forever. The title I've been given for this talk is not gentle. It's not sweet. It says, 3 types of people can never succeed. That's a hard statement, but sometimes hard truths are the only ones worth telling. And I want you to understand something before I even begin. When I say never succeed, I'm not talking about people who make mistakes. I'm not talking about people who fall down and get back up again. I'm not talking about people who are struggling right now. Struggle is not failure. Struggle is life. I'm talking about something deeper, about attitudes, about choices, about the way you walk through this world. Let me take you into my courtroom for a moment. Not the legal courtroom with its flags and benches and rules of evidence, but the courtroom of life where every day I've watched real people walk in, people with tears in their eyes, people clutching bills they can't pay, people with excuses, people with hope. And I've seen a pattern. There are some who always find a way to move forward, even when everything is against them. And there are some who sabotage themselves before the world even lays a hand on them. Those are the people I want to talk about. The first kind of person who will never succeed is the one who refuses to take responsibility. You know, this person, maybe you've seen them, maybe you've been them. I think at some point we all have. It's always someone else's fault. The teacher didn't like me. The boss had it in for me. The world's unfair. My family didn't help me. They'll tell you 1,000 reasons why they're standing still, but none of those reasons involve a mirror. I have looked into the eyes of grown men, blaming parking tickets on the weather. I've seen people who've made serious mistakes, drinking and driving, hurting their families, wasting opportunities, and yet they point to everyone else but themselves. Now let me tell you something is as certain as sunrise. You cannot steer a car if you refuse to hold the wheel. If every time you hit a bump you say, "That's not me, that's the road," you're never going to learn how to drive. Life is a car. You're the driver. And if you don't accept that, you'll end up in a ditch, wondering why no one came to pull you out. When I was a boy, my father used to come home from work covered in dust and sweat. He didn't have a fancy job. He didn't have an education, but he had dignity. And when things went wrong, when the bills piled up, when food was short, he never once looked at us and said, "This is someone else's fault." He stood tall and said, "We'll get through this." That's what responsibility looks like. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about saying, the mistakes are mine, and so is the power to fix them. The second kind of person who will never succeed is the one who quits when things get hard. You can call it laziness, you can call it weakness, but it all comes down to the same thing. They stop before they've even begun. I've seen people with incredible talent, people who could paint like angels, sing like birds, calculate numbers in their head faster than a machine. But the moment life put an obstacle in their path, they said, well, I guess it wasn't meant to be. Let me tell you something about success. Success doesn't knock politely. Success doesn't say, excuse me, I'd like to come in now. No. Success bangs on the door in the middle of a storm. It rattles the windows. It makes a mess. And you'd better be ready to open the door, even if you're tired, even if you're scared, even if you don't think you're dressed for the occasion. Success is stubborn, and it only reveals itself to people who are even more stubborn. I remember a young man who came before me years ago. He'd been caught doing something foolish, driving without insurance, without registration, without anything. He stood there nervous, and I asked him, "What are you doing with your life?" He told me he dropped out of school because it was too hard. He said he'd tried working, but it was boring. He said he wanted to be a musician, but didn't have the patience to practice. I looked at him and I said, "Son, you're 20 years old, and you've already quit on yourself 3 times. Do you expect the world to wait around while you make up your mind? We all get tired. We all face setbacks. But the people who make it in life are the ones who refuse to quit. They dig deep when there's nothing left to dig. They say, one more step, one more day, one more try." They don't confuse temporary defeat with permanent failure. That's the difference. Now, the third kind of person who will never succeed is perhaps the saddest of all. This is the person who refuses to learn. The person who already knows everything. The person who says, "You can't tell me anything." I've seen them at every age. Young people who think they're smarter than experience itself. Older folks who think there's nothing new to understand. Workers who won't take advice. Students who won't listen. Leaders who won't be taught. Let me tell you something. The moment you stop learning, you start dying. And I don't mean your heart stops beating. I mean your spirit shrivels. The world changes every single day. Life is a teacher that never retires. And if you sit there with your arms folded, saying, "No thanks, I've got it all figured out," life will leave you behind faster than you can blink. I had a man in my courtroom once who came in for the same violation 3 times in 1 year. The same mistake over and over. I said to him, "Didn't you learn the first time?" And he smiled and shrugged as if it was a joke. But it wasn't a joke, because every time you refuse to learn, you're wasting not just money on fines or time on mistakes. You're wasting your own life. You're proving to the world that you don't value your own future. These three types, the ones who blame others, the ones who quit, and the ones who refuse to learn, they're carrying anchors around their necks. They're trying to run a race with chains on their feet. And here's the cruel part. No one put those chains on them. They forged those chains themselves. Now, maybe you're thinking, Judge, I've been one of those people. I've blamed others. I've quit. I've been stubborn and refused to learn. Well, let me tell you something that might surprise you. So have I. So has every person you've ever admired. The difference is, successful people recognize those moments and change. They cut the chains. They throw off the anchors. They say, I'm not going to live like this anymore. I'm not here to condemn anyone. I'm not here to write anybody off. I'm here to tell you the truth so you can do something about it, because you can. You can take responsibility today. You can stop quitting today. You can start learning today. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't need the government. You don't need a judge. You just need to decide that your life is worth the effort. I want you to think of someone you admire, a parent, a teacher, an athlete, an artist, a leader. Do you think their life was easy? Do you think they never failed, never stumbled, never got tired? Of course they did, but they didn't let those moments define them. They defined themselves by what they did next. I'll leave you with this. Every day when you wake up, life gives you a blank page. You can write excuses on it. You can write complaints on it. Or you can write courage, responsibility, persistence, and humility. If you write those words every day, even if no one else sees them, even if the world ignores you at first, sooner or later life will read what you've written, and life will reward you. So to every person here, young or old, rich or poor, whatever your background, don't be the one who blames. Don't be the one who quits. Don't be the one who refuses to learn. Be the one who says, I own my life. I will keep going. I will stay teachable. Do that and you will succeed, not just in making money or earning titles, but in becoming someone you're proud to be. You can't change yesterday, but you can rewrite tomorrow. Think about that for a moment. Let it sink in. We spend so much of our lives staring backward, don't we? Looking at old mistakes like they're etched in stone, punishing ourselves over and over for decisions we made when we were younger, less wise, more afraid. I've seen people walk into my courtroom burdened not by the fine they owe or the charge they face, but by the crushing weight of guilt they carry from years ago. They live every day as though they're still on trial for something they did 5, 10, 20 years in the past. But no matter how long you stare at yesterday, no matter how much you wish you could reach into it and rearrange it, you can't. Yesterday is done. The ink is dry. But here's the good news, and it's not just good, it's liberating. Tomorrow isn't written yet. Tomorrow is a blank page, and you hold the pen. You can't tear pages out of the book of your life that you wish weren't there, but you can write new chapters. You can choose how the next scene unfolds. That's not just optimism. That's truth. I remember a man who came before me years ago. He was in his 60s, tired, worn down. He had a small violation, but I could tell something deeper was troubling him. He looked at me and said, "Judge, I wasted my whole life. I ruined my marriage. I lost my kids. I drank too much. I gambled everything away. Now I'm old, and it's too late." I looked at him and said, "Sir, you're not dead yet. As long as you're breathing, you've got time to write a different ending." He started crying right there in court, not because of the fine. It was only a few dollars, but because someone reminded him that his story wasn't finished. We live as though time is a thief. We say, "I'm too old. It's too late. My chance is gone." But time isn't a thief. Time is a gift. It's handing you a clean slate every morning, whether you take it or not. And the only real thief is regret, because regret convinces you to surrender the pen, to believe that because you wrote something messy on yesterday's page, you're not allowed to write something beautiful today. Look at any person you admire, a leader, an inventor, an artist, a parent who raised you right. Do you think they had perfect yesterdays? I promise you they didn't. The greatest men and women in history have made colossal mistakes. But they didn't live there. They didn't chain themselves to yesterday's failures. They said, "I can't change what I did, but I can decide what I do next." You see, the danger isn't in making mistakes. The danger is in believing your mistakes define you forever. When you think that way, you stop trying, you accept defeat, you go through life as if the verdict is already in and there's no appeal. But that's not true. Life gives you an appeal every single morning. The sun rises, and you get to decide whether to live in yesterday's shadow or in tomorrow's light. I remember a young woman who stood before me shaking. She had been arrested for shoplifting. When I asked her why she did it, she said, "Judge, I'm just no good. I've been in and out of trouble since I was a teenager. My family's ashamed of me. I'll never be anything." I looked at her and said, "You're talking about yourself as if the story is already over. But it's not over. You're only 23. You have 100 blank pages left to write. Why are you letting a few bad ones tell the whole story?" That conversation didn't erase what she'd done, but it reminded her of something powerful. Her mistakes were events, not definitions. You can't change yesterday, but you can rewrite tomorrow. That means you have to stop trying to edit the past and start authoring the future. Some of you spend your lives saying, "If only I had done this. If only I hadn't done that." If only I could go back. Well, you can't go back, but you can go forward. You can wake up tomorrow and live in a way that makes you proud. And the strange thing is, when you live your tomorrow well, your past starts to look different too. Those mistakes that once haunted you become lessons. Those failures that once defined you become turning points. I've seen people who were once criminals become mentors. I've seen people who abandoned their families come back and rebuild relationships brick by brick. I've seen people who lived selfishly for decades turn into some of the most generous souls you could ever meet. They didn't do it by erasing yesterday. They did it by seizing tomorrow. I think of my own father, who came to this country with nothing. He didn't speak the language. He didn't have an education. And there were days when he stumbled. He made mistakes, like every human being does. But he never let those moments decide his future. He taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by how perfectly he walks, but by how often he gets back up when he falls. This lesson applies to everyone. Maybe you're a student who failed a class. Maybe you're a parent who feels like you've let your kids down. Maybe you're someone who's been through addiction, or bankruptcy, or divorce, or jail. Whatever your yesterday looks like, it doesn't have to dictate your tomorrow. You don't have to keep rereading the same sad chapter. You can pick up the pen and start writing something new today. But let me tell you something, and I'm going to be very direct here. Rewriting tomorrow takes courage. It's easy to sit around and dream about a better life. It's easy to say, someday I'll change. But someday never comes unless you make it today. You can't keep waiting for the perfect moment, because it doesn't exist. You can't keep saying, I'll do it after I fix this, after I get that job, after I feel ready. You will never feel ready. You just have to start. Rewriting tomorrow also takes responsibility. You have to stop blaming other people for your yesterdays. Maybe someone hurt you. Maybe someone betrayed you. Maybe life was unfair. I don't deny any of that. But carrying bitterness into tomorrow is like drinking poison and hoping someone else gets sick. At some point you have to say, what happened to me wasn't my choice, but how I live from this day forward is. And finally, rewriting tomorrow takes humility. You have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to admit you don't have it all figured out. Some people stay stuck in yesterday because they refuse to open their minds. They think they know it all. They don't listen to advice. They don't seek guidance. But when you're humble enough to be taught, to be corrected, to be mentored, doors open that you never even knew were there. Every morning, I wake up and I remind myself that I have work to do. Not legal work, not courtroom work. I have work to do on myself. I ask, what kind of man do I want to be today? What kind of father? What kind of husband? What kind of friend? Because yesterday's kindness doesn't excuse today's cruelty. Yesterday's courage doesn't excuse today's cowardice. Every day I have to write a new page. And so do you. I once had a young man in court who told me, "Judge, I'm just unlucky." I said, "Son, luck is a word lazy people use to describe other people's persistence. Stop thinking you're cursed and start thinking you're capable. You're not unlucky, you're unfocused. You've been writing the same bad page every day. Try writing a different one." And I'll never forget, a year later, that young man came back to court just to shake my hand. He said he'd gone back to school, gotten a job, and was taking care of his mother. He rewrote tomorrow, and if he can, you can too. When you wake up tomorrow, ask yourself this: what will I write today? Will I write excuses? Will I write complaints? Will I write another sad page that looks just like yesterday? Or will I write courage? Will I write gratitude? Will I write responsibility, persistence, and hope? Life is handing you the pen, whether you like it or not. You can scribble nonsense. You can copy the same mistakes over and over. Or you can write something worth reading. Something you'd be proud to show your children. Something you'd be proud to sign your name to. You can't change yesterday, but you can rewrite tomorrow. Quitting once makes quitting twice easier. That's not just a saying, it's a law of human nature. The first time you walk away from something you know you should have finished, and something inside you changes. It's small at first, almost invisible. You feel a little relief. You tell yourself it was the right decision. You make excuses, maybe good excuses, but something has been weakened. That voice inside you that used to say, "Keep going, you can do this," suddenly gets quieter. And the next time you face something hard, something uncomfortable, quitting doesn't feel like a last resort anymore. It feels like an option. And the more you take that option, the easier it becomes, until quitting isn't even a choice anymore. It's a habit. I've seen this so many times in my courtroom and in my life. I've watched young men and women who quit school because it was too hard. Later they quit jobs because the boss was too strict. Later still they quit relationships because they required effort. And each time, the decision was a little easier than before. What started as just this once became a way of living. And the tragedy is, they never realized that they weren't just quitting school, or quitting work, or quitting a person. They were quitting on themselves. I remember a young man who stood before me with his head down. He'd been fined multiple times for the same violations: parking tickets, registrations, missed payments. I asked him what was going on. He said, "Judge, I just gave up. It's too much. Every time I try to catch up, something else happens, so I quit trying." I looked at him and said, "Son, you're 25 years old, and you're already talking like life beat you. If you quit on small battles, how will you ever fight the big ones?" He didn't have an answer. Because the truth is, quitting becomes reflexive. Once you let yourself walk away from one responsibility, you start believing you can walk away from any of them. Quitting is deceptive because it gives you immediate relief. You feel lighter for a moment. You put down the weight and you breathe. But what you don't see right away is that you've lost strength. You've told yourself, I'm not strong enough to carry this. And every time you tell yourself that, you make it more true. I've seen people who quit a workout program after one bad week and end up quitting on their health. I've seen people who quit saving money after one financial setback and end up broke for decades. I've seen people who quit chasing a dream because it got hard and spend the rest of their lives wondering, what if? Let me tell you about my father. He worked long, hard hours, and he had every reason to quit when life was unfair, but he never did. When bills piled up, he kept working. When opportunities closed, he kept knocking. When others told him to give up, he ignored them. And because he never let quitting become an option, he built a life for his family brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. Watching him taught me that perseverance isn't about never getting tired. It's about refusing to let that first quitting decision happen. Because once it happens, the door is open, and the next time you're tempted to give up, you remember how easy it felt. This doesn't just apply to big life choices. It applies to the smallest things. The first time you hit snooze instead of getting up when you promised yourself you would, you've planted a seed. The first time you skip the study session because you're tired, you've planted a seed. The first time you tell yourself, just this once, and walk away from something difficult, that seed grows roots. And one day you wake up and wonder why you can't seem to stick with anything. It's because quitting became familiar. It became comfortable. Now, I'm not saying you should never walk away from anything. Sometimes you have to leave toxic situations, bad jobs, destructive habits. But there's a difference between quitting out of wisdom and quitting out of weakness. Wisdom says, this path leads nowhere, I will take another. Weakness says, this path is hard, I'll stop walking altogether. Most people pretend weakness is wisdom, but deep down they know the truth. I had a woman in court who told me she dropped out of nursing school because it was too much. She said the classes were hard, the hours were long, and she was exhausted. But later, when I asked what she was doing now, she said she'd started a job she hated, working longer hours for less money. I asked her, wasn't nursing school hard? Yes. But wasn't it leading somewhere better? She nodded. Then why quit? She didn't have an answer. And that's the danger. Quitting feels justified in the moment, but in the long run, it leaves you stuck in places you don't want to be. When you quit once, you tell yourself it's okay. When you quit twice, you believe it's normal. By the third or fourth time, you don't even need an excuse anymore. It's just who you are. I've seen this with people who can't keep a job, who can't keep a commitment, who can't keep a promise, even to themselves. And it always starts the same way, with one decision to walk away instead of push through. The people who succeed in life aren't always the smartest, or the richest, or the most talented, but they have one thing in common: they refuse to quit. Even when it's hard, even when they're tired, even when they fail, they try again. And because they don't let quitting become a habit, perseverance becomes their habit instead. They train themselves to push forward, and just like quitting gets easier the more you do it, perseverance also gets easier the more you do it. I think about a young man I met who wanted to be a firefighter. He failed the entrance exam twice. The first time, he wanted to quit. The second time, he nearly did. But he forced himself to try a third time, and he passed. Now he runs into burning buildings for a living. Imagine if he'd given up after the first failure. Imagine if he'd let quitting write his story. He told me later that forcing himself to keep going not only got him the job, it changed who he was. He learned to see himself as someone who finishes, someone who doesn't back down. That's the power of refusing to quit. It changes your self-image, and that self-image shapes everything you do. I've also seen the opposite. A man came to court who'd been out of work for years. Every job he got, he left after a few months. The boss didn't like me. The hours were too long. The pay wasn't enough. He had a reason for every exit, but really, he had just learned to walk away whenever life asked him for effort. He didn't even see it anymore. Quitting was automatic. He wasn't choosing to quit. Quitting was choosing him. Every time you quit on yourself, you make it easier to believe you can't finish anything. You train your brain to expect failure. And when you expect failure, you don't try as hard. You protect yourself by saying, "It doesn't matter," or "I didn't really want it anyway." That's how people spend years, even decades, living below their potential. Not because they weren't capable, but because they let quitting become a reflex. But here's what's also true. Just as quitting can become a habit, so can perseverance. The first time you refuse to quit, when everything inside you wants to stop, it's hard. The second time, it's still hard, but a little more familiar. The third time, you start to see yourself differently. You start to say, "I'm someone who finishes what I start." That belief becomes a shield against fear, against doubt, against failure. And just as quitting once makes quitting twice easier, pushing through once makes pushing through twice easier. I want you to think about your own life. Where have you quit? Where have you walked away not because it was right, but because it was hard? Did you ever notice how easy it was to do the next time? Did you ever notice how those moments multiplied? If you see that pattern in yourself, don't ignore it, acknowledge it, and decide right now that the next time you're tempted to quit, you'll push just a little farther, because every time you resist quitting, you break that cycle. The truth is, life will test you. It will put obstacles in your path, not to stop you, but to see how badly you want to move forward. If you give up at the first sign of trouble, life learns you're not serious. But if you keep pushing, if you refuse to give in, life eventually steps aside. Quitting once makes quitting twice easier, and before you know it, you've quit not just on a task, not just on a goal, but on yourself. But if you can hold on through that first temptation, if you can refuse to quit just once, you build a strength inside you that will serve you for the rest of your life. Life rewards learners, not know-it-alls. I've lived long enough and seen enough people walk through my courtroom to know this isn't just a clever phrase. It's a truth that you can test every single day of your life. The people who keep learning, no matter how young or old they are, no matter how much they've accomplished, are the ones who grow, the ones who thrive, the ones who find opportunities where others see dead ends. But the people who think they already know it all, who close their ears, who stop being curious, they stay stuck, they fall behind, and they can't even see why it's happening. I've watched people come before me with problems, legal, financial, personal, and I've seen two kinds of attitudes. The first kind says, "Judge, I messed up. What can I do to fix it? How can I learn from this?" And you can see hope in their eyes. You can see a door opening because they're humble enough to listen, to change, to try something new. The second kind walks in with their arms folded, eyes hard, and says, "I don't need anyone telling me what to do. I already know." Those are the people who come back again and again because they never learn. They think every warning is an insult, every lesson is a waste of time, and every teacher is beneath them. The world is always changing. Life is always teaching. But if you act like you already have all the answers, you miss the lesson. And the cruel part is, life doesn't stop teaching just because you stop listening. It just repeats the test until you fail so badly that you're forced to pay attention. I've seen people who could have turned their whole lives around if they just admitted, "I don't know everything. Show me what to do." But pride wouldn't let them. They'd rather fall flat on their face than take advice. I think of a young man who came before me on a driving violation. He'd been stopped 3 times in 6 months for the same thing. Expired registration. I said, "Why didn't you take care of this after the first ticket?" He smirked and said, "Judge, I know how to handle my business." But clearly, he didn't. And because he refused to learn, what could have been a quick fix became a costly habit. He kept paying fines instead of solving the problem. That's what pride does. It makes simple lessons expensive. Now, being a learner doesn't mean you have to sit in a classroom all your life. It doesn't mean you have to collect degrees or memorize books. It means you're open. It means you admit you don't know everything, and you're willing to listen to people who know more than you in a certain area. It means when life knocks you down, you don't just get back up. You ask, why did I fall? What can I do differently next time? I think about my father, who never had a formal education. He came to this country with nothing but the clothes on his back and the determination to make a better life. He worked with his hands. He didn't have fancy words, but he was one of the wisest men I've ever known because he never stopped learning. He learned English from neighbors. He learned work skills from people who had been here longer. He learned how to stretch $1 by watching how others saved. He was never too proud to ask questions, never too proud to watch and listen. And because of that, life rewarded him. Compare that to the people I've seen who think asking questions is a weakness, who think they're too smart to listen. They walk into jobs and ignore instructions because I've got it. I already know. They ruin opportunities because they won't let anyone correct them. They ruin relationships because they can't admit they might be wrong. And the saddest part is they don't even see it happening. They blame everyone else. They say, people are jealous of me. People don't respect me. No, people just get tired of trying to teach someone who refuses to learn. I had a man in his 50s come to court, and he'd been driving for 30 years without ever getting a proper license. I asked why. He said, "Judge, I know how to drive. I don't need anybody's permission." But because of that attitude, he paid fine after fine, year after year. Instead of taking one afternoon to learn the rules and do things the right way, his pride cost him thousands of dollars and endless trouble. Imagine how much easier his life could have been if he'd just been willing to learn from the start. Life rewards learners because learners grow stronger with every experience. They turn mistakes into wisdom. They turn advice into opportunity. They turn criticism into fuel. A learner doesn't see correction as an insult. They see it as a gift. Someone cared enough to help them see what they couldn't see themselves. But a no, it all takes every correction as an attack, every lesson as an inconvenience. They miss the treasure because they're too busy guarding their ego. I've met young people who act like they've already lived 100 years. You try to give them guidance, and they roll their eyes. They think advice is for other people, not for them. But life has a way of humbling you. If you don't learn willingly, life will teach you through pain. And the longer you resist, the harsher the lessons become. I've also met older folks who stop learning because they think age equals wisdom. They say, "I've seen it all." No, you haven't. The world changes every day. Technology changes. Culture changes, opportunities change. The moment you stop learning, you start falling behind. And then you wonder why younger people are passing you by. It's not because they're luckier. It's because they're still learning. Being a learner requires humility. It takes courage to admit, I don't know. It takes strength to listen instead of talk. It takes maturity to seek out people who are better than you at something and ask them for help. I've never met a truly successful person who didn't have a mentor, a teacher, or at least a willingness to be taught. I remember a young woman who stood before me on a minor violation. But what struck me wasn't the case. It was her attitude. She asked thoughtful questions. She wanted to understand, not just pay the fine and walk away. She was the kind of person you knew would do well in life because she was hungry to learn. That hunger will take you farther than talent, farther than money, farther than luck. Because when you're a learner, you can adapt to anything. You can start over if you have to. You can grow no matter where you're planted. The know-it-all, on the other hand, is fragile. The moment something happens they didn't expect, they fall apart. Why? Because they're not prepared to adjust. They don't know how to listen, how to absorb, how to evolve. They've built their whole identity around being right, and the first time they're wrong, they can't handle it. Life will always challenge you, and if you're too proud to learn, life will break you. I think about a man who came to court furious about a ticket. He wouldn't let me explain, wouldn't let me finish a sentence. He kept saying, I know the law, I know my rights, I don't need to hear this. But if he really knew, he wouldn't have been standing there in the first place. He paid his fine, stormed out, and I thought to myself, he learned nothing today, and because he learned nothing, he'll be back. Life rewards learners, not know-it-alls, because learners are flexible, learners improve, learners gain skills and wisdom with every step. The know-it-all stays stuck because they refuse to admit there's room to grow. And here's the irony. The people who really do know a lot are usually the first to admit how much they still have to learn. The truly wise are humble. The truly strong are teachable. I want you to think about your own life. How do you react when someone corrects you? Do you get defensive? Do you shut down? Or do you lean in and ask, what can I learn from this? How do you handle failure? Do you pretend it didn't happen? Or do you analyze it and figure out what you could do better next time? Are you surrounding yourself with people who challenge you, or only with people who agree with you so you can feel comfortable? I've met people who have failed in business once and refused to try again because they don't want to admit they need to learn something new. I've met students who fail one test and give up on school because they don't want to face the embarrassment of asking for help. I've met employees who lose one job and blame the boss instead of asking themselves, what could I have done differently? And because they never learn, they keep repeating the same mistakes. But I've also met people who take every setback as a lesson. They ask questions. They look for mentors. They read, they watch, they listen. And those are the people who turn small chances into big victories. Life opens doors for them because they're prepared to walk through them. They've trained themselves to grow instead of hardening themselves with pride. When you're a learner, failure doesn't scare you. Correction doesn't insult you. Change doesn't threaten you. You welcome it all because you know every experience makes you better. But when you're a know-all, failure humiliates you, correction angers you, and change terrifies you. You spend your life protecting your ego instead of improving your life.